Okay, welcome, Rami. We're going to do our usual discussion of minding emotions, and this time we've got kind of a special treat because we're going to play some music for folks. I'll introduce myself and then I'll turn it over to you. My name is Stephen Asma. I am a professor of philosophy at Columbia College in Chicago and a member of the research group in Mind, Science, and Culture. And we should make a note that we have a new and glorious website.
Yeah.
So maybe if people are interested, go to...
We'll put the link at the thing.
Yeah, we'll put the link in the comment section or whatever it is. And so, Rami, go ahead and introduce yourself.
My name is Rami Gabriel. I'm associate professor of psychology at Columbia College and also a member of the research group in Mind, Science, and Culture.
And today we're going to do something fun. We've done some crazy stuff on here, including puppet shows. But this time we're both going to play some musical instruments. So make sure you we're going to play some resonator guitar and some oud, some Middle Eastern music, some American music. But we're really interested in music and the emotions. I worked on a book a few years ago on the evolution of imagination, and one of the things that was interesting was to look at the literature on the evolution of music. And there's all this interesting work. One of the probably principal players is Stephen Mithin, an anthropologist, who argued in The Singing Neanderthal that he thinks Neanderthals had music and sort of makes an argument for that. So I think this is a fascinating territory. And then I happened to be in Berkeley at a conference last week and was invited. A friend of mine is kind of a big fan and practitioner of Indian classical music, and he took me to this guy's house. He's a wonderful sarod player. Maybe we'll put a link to his work too in the links section. And we're just in his living room, and a student comes over, and the sarod, as you well know, but maybe some listeners aren't aware, it's a kind of like an oud, I guess. It's an Indian instrument. It has no frets. How would you describe it, really? The neck is like metal, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fretless. It's got the strings that you're playing on, and it has sympathetic strings underneath it. And
it's kind of like a gourd, which resonates on the bottom. And a student came and was basically just studying with this master. So I got to sit there and watch this. And I've seen this before, and I know you've seen it before, but I don't know that a lot of Westerners have seen this kind of thing where the master plays a riff essentially, and then the student has to mimic it. And it's a pretty. It can be if the student's of a high caliber, it is itself just music. It's just gorgeous to listen to. If the student is poor, then they're constantly getting scolded, and the master will replay. But I found it to be really intriguing in terms of like how we acquire these skills, as practitioners. I thought it was emotionally very rich. They were playing like in something like a minor scale, so it had all this emotional resonance. So I thought, this would be a good way to start and start talking about music and emotion. When did you first start playing music, and what drew you to become a music practitioner?
I started, I think I was around 12 years old, and the normal way it starts here is with a guitar, and the role models for guitar are all these
rockers,
these heroes, kind of modern day heroes, in a way. At least for teenage boys.
Yeah, that's true. Guitar heroes, yeah. Obnoxious though they are, they're inspiring when you're 13.
Yeah. And then I started getting into other instruments. I started playing the oud. I was 16, I think. Then that's a different kind of learning. That's a different kind of way of doing it. And I did a lot of self-taught, mostly self-taught. But I had people that along the way that had the sort of guru, relationship that you're describing. A few people, and kept enjoying it, and it's part of. I mean, that's what I want to talk about too. Is like how much it's a part of it is social, how much of it is your friends, and a way of communicating with friends. We've played music together for years, and it's another way of, interacting.
Yeah, it's a pretty important form of social bonding. I feel like many people were either in rock bands when they were young, or they were in orchestral band, or marching band, or they played in a music program with their friends at school or apart from school. And I feel like those are pretty strong paradigms of friendship, because you're sort of collectively solving problems together, and there's a kind of all that sort of neurochemistry of oxytocin bonding is there, and there's also there are kind of stakes depending on what you're playing and who you're playing for. Sometimes it's a high stakes situation. You're playing at a gig in front of people. It's almost like it cements friendships together because you're under stress together. You know what I mean? So yeah, maybe we should just play something. Do you want to start, or should I start playing something?
You should go ahead. One thing while you're setting up, I was thinking about how much too of the band is like a sort of tribe, mini,
yeah,
a band of brothers.
That's right.
Against the world in a way, kind of. At that time, it's really important too when you're younger and you're trying to find your social group, and also you're trying to. It's good to pool your resources of your frustrations and your admirations and your enthusiasm, and make it creative. It's a lot of ways working through people. So you write the songs too, so you're working through something, and it could be sophomoric or whatever, but it could also, when people you start to learn to collaborate too.
That's right. Yeah, it's one of those. Like in sports, let's say everybody's on a basketball team or a baseball team. You also learn to work together, and it can have all of those great properties. But if you're in a band or play music together, it seems like there's other layers or just a different kind of social bonding, because it's this creative act as well. And I think you're right. Like when you're young, it might form one of your earliest strong tribes.
Yeah.
It certainly did for me. Like in high school, it was a way to be like, and we teach at an art school, so like all our students are like this too. It's a kind of bohemian club, and you're sort of hipper, and you see yourselves as kind of bohemians and not with the squares, so to speak. So there's all that stuff is happening, I think, emotionally in music too. So can you hear that all right?
Yeah, what are you gonna be playing?
I don't know. I guess maybe I could just I could improvise some blues or something.
Okay.
One of the things that we're going to talk about here is sort of the emotional moods that music can provide. And this is an interesting question, because I'll do a demonstration here on guitar, and then you do a demonstration on oud. I'll play a scale that people will recognize perhaps as kind of sad or melancholy, at least in Western culture. And then maybe halfway through, I'll just play for like a minute or so. Maybe halfway through, I'll switch to a major scale. And I think if viewers or listeners can try to pick where that happens, that would be interesting to see if they can just hear phenomenologically where the emotional mood alters. Okay.
Mm.
So something that has a vaguely sad sound and then something that sounds quite a bit nicer. Now what you're hearing there is they're doing construction on my building, so we're hearing some kind of drilling sound in the background. Hopefully that won't last long.
Well, the drilling sound is also interesting, and it's also it's. I guess we could also talk about why do we hear some things as music,
Yeah.
some things as not. Like
Yeah,
you started,
the noise
yeah,
tradition.
noise, and also you started playing, and then you started going somewhere, and you improvised that whole thing. So it
Yeah.
felt like you were leading yourself. Like you heard a note, and then you went further into that idea. You heard somewhere you didn't want to go, you backed away from it.
Yeah.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about how, if you can reflect on the experience of what you just
Yeah, that's
worked through.
one of the things that, of course, cognitive science now seems increasingly convinced of is that there are these, uh, sort of two pathways of processing in the brain, one of which is sometimes called the, system one, system two. We've talked about this before. There's a kind of ventral and a dorsal pathway. And one of the things I think might be happening in terms of music improvisation is that it happens so fast, like you said. Like I hear something and then quickly have to adjust to something else. And it really doesn't. It's not a set of inferences or calculations up in the cold cognition of the dorsal pathway. It feels like it must be happening in this very fast, quick time ventral pathway, where I'm getting just a vague sense, like, no, don't go there. Yes, go here. Don't go there. Go here. So there is something like it's almost like perception. It's very fast. Like I'm reading something immediately, like an affordance in a way.
I was thinking these are sonic affordances.
Yeah.
Uh, sometimes you think especially with improvisation music, you don't even know what's going to happen, and it's the way. Also, that's why for musicians, tone is so important.
Yeah.
If you have good tone, you can play all night. That's what
true.
Everyone says, and it's like because the tone is leading you further into the exploration of certain sounds. Like I played a show last night, and my tone was not good because there was a change in the way the monitors, whatever. So I couldn't play. I didn't want to play.
Didn't feel the inspiration.
I didn't want to play because I wasn't being led anywhere. And then we fixed it for the last set, and suddenly I was excited and moving and inside the instrument.
That's interesting.
Because
you've got a kind of we have to think of the creator as having a motivational challenge. And you were saying, look, at that time with the tone being bad like that, you weren't motivated at all to play. And then you got the right tone, and suddenly there was something you were chasing. It suddenly became a project.
Yeah, it's like there's a sonic affordance, and there was some sort of emotional affordance that I want more of that. And you get that with the blues. When the blues gets deeper and deeper, you want more. Like you start to get into that trance-like state. So maybe I could play something that's more with a little bit of that trance stuff too, to pull out the idea of getting deeper.
Yeah. Go ahead and play something on oud that maybe embodies some of those ideas.
Okay, I'll play a little bit. You were playing some major stuff. I'll do similar thing where I'll change the mode, or in this tradition, the makam, very subtly, hopefully, and I'll improvise too, and let's see if there's some shift in emotions. But I'll also try to deepen the sense of wanting more. I'll see if I can. Depends on the tone, So I'll try.
Nice. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the, we brought up this topic of musical affordances, and one of the things that's quite different in the traditional sort of tempered scale and what you were just doing are those sort of, do we call them microtones? They're sort of like the notes in between the notes.
Mm-hmm. Quarter tones, yeah.
Yeah. And I noticed, like, if you're a Westerner and you're raised on, pianos and stuff that are fretted, there's a sense in which people hear that as dissonant. Whereas in Middle Eastern culture, that stuff is part of I guess it's read dissonant too, but it's part of it's not read as a mistake or like the guy can't find the tuning. It's read as part of the dynamism of the melody and so forth. So maybe we could talk a little bit about this, because why does that? Why do these two different cultures have this different scale, and how does it affect us emotionally? How do we acquire these affordances?
Well, I think it's like language. Every culture's got a different language, and the sounds mean something else. And this is just the language of this tradition. And there's also a lot of variation within the Middle East about these, so to speak, quarter notes, or the maqam. So that's still, people have to negotiate that when they play together. But I think that the difference is because it's just a cultural difference, and all those notes are there. Like there's a whole, if you go around everywhere, there's all kinds of microtonal systems in a lot of music. There's microtonal things in Western music too.
Yeah.
Like leading tones, and in blues, like you did get some, bending.
Yeah.
In the guitar tradition, the violin tradition has a lot of this stuff. And you're seeing some of these synth guys are programming in between notes too. So I think that it's a wider spectrum, but the tempered system that we have is a very good mathematical system for a lot of reasons, especially for the piano, to keep the piano, to deal with the piano intonation thing. So so I just think it's normal part of language.
And a normal part of singing too, right? I mean, all those tones are in the voice if the singing voice is one of the original musical, media, then these instruments, particularly like the stringed instruments, are oftentimes trying to emulate the complexity of the human voice too.
Mm-hmm. And what I was doing, just to follow up on the thing you were saying, is I was just going in sort of one scale, which was this Rast scale on C, on Do. But then I was building. You know, I was kind of focusing on this note for a while, then I was focusing on this note for a while, then I started focusing on the G, then I kind of focused on getting up to the octave, and then from there I built up tension to release it, and did a final kafla.
Were you improvising that whole sequence, like, or did you think like I'm going to work it this way from the beginning, like you had a plan?
I improvise it, but it follows a scale. It's a very simplistic way of taking the scale and just kind of working up and working down. In a performance context, I would have made it a lot more complicated. I only modulated maybe once. I did this modulation. So I just did one modulation, but usually I would work a lot more of them in. And you have to do it at a dramatic time, like you were asking about the notes and the emotional nature. So a lot of things is getting people into a sound and into the drone of this one particular sound, and then changing a crucial note at the right time, you know, for yourself and for the audience and for the mood. That's how you make it dynamic, especially in this sort of music, which is focusing on, it's a drone, focusing on one note. So you have to create tension with the melody itself, and with your note selection, and with the relational movements.
Yeah.
The relative movement going from this note, you've heard this for 2 minutes, and suddenly you're hearing this.
Right.
So something happens to you. And I feel like there are these affordance things that are happening to you, but I feel there's also this emotional switch going on, that you're out of the lulling, but you're also, maybe your interest is peaked again. Maybe your motivational state goes up again because you're used to, it's going to stay like this the whole time. Then you hear something.
Yeah.
You hear like in the chromaticisms in like the great Western composers too. They'll put chromaticisms in certain places to enliven the sort of modality of it. You hear this changing from the classical composers into Mozart, right?
Yeah. Well, that's interesting too, because the literature on things like wonder and curiosity, it's not a very deep literature. There's not a whole lot there. But one of the things that people have suggested is that you get the thing that draws your attention are these sort of category violations. Like you have a certain expectation of how it's going to go, and in a way in music, the drone helps set that up, and maybe even the melody helps set that up. But then, like in jazz, you get the middle eighth, and it's suddenly like this left turn. Like, okay, now you've got the melody, and then suddenly you're like doing this totally different thing. And I think that that's an interesting point about the way in which music is not tapping some entirely different cognitive architecture. It's using the cognitive architecture that we're employing in perception and in cognition and in thinking, but it's just doing it in a very different way. I mean, it's got other stuff going on too. Yeah,
that's what I'm trying to emphasize, the emotional part of it, because I guess probably we don't talk about that much. We talk about like, we love music because it speaks to us. It elevates our moods. It's a mode of expression. That's like the very common way of talking about music. But I'm just trying to bring up too, what are the dynamics of the nuts and bolts concerning emotions?
Yeah.
Like micro expectations and.
No, I think the emotions are being. I would venture to say that there's a kind of like we were doing, like if you play something minor. That there might be some kind of emotional semantics, like it means something because you associate it with feelings of sadness or melancholy, versus like that just sounds a little happier. So there's a kind of semantic palette.
But we've been sort of taught that too. That's part of our language,
right?
It's like this is how you use the vernacular. I mean, even like if you heard, duh, 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 I mean, there's certain sounds that have now become pregnant with a certain meaning.
Yeah.
and those combination of notes, you can't unhear it.
Yeah, that's right.
Like the beginning of the American national anthem.
Okay, yeah.
You know, those notes you can't hear those notes by themselves. Like once it's in that structure, it is. So that's what I'm saying. It's more like a language because we learn the semiotics of it, and they become embedded in the sound itself.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about that too, because one of the things that has been argued, I think, kind of persuasively, although it's going to remain kind of speculative, is that language is maybe even a much earlier form of communication, an earlier form of language than spoken language, and that it does seem to have, in addition to maybe the semantic meanings that get built up culturally, there are some syntactical properties of music that are a lot like the kind of things that linguistic scholars have said, define language. So Chomsky famously has these requirements of grammar, that's generative and recursion and this kind of thing. And I think in music too, you have this recursion where you have a repeating pattern, just like a simple. And that can help contribute to the kind of emotional trance that you want and get
Rhythmic.
And the rhythmic body motion, where you're in sync with everybody else in the room, and that's a great kind of social communication. But then also, like in language, you can embed other phrases inside phrases. Like you can take a structure and then just like in a speech, you can put a clause inside a clause inside a clause. So you have these layers of propositions,
But I would argue the semiotics of sound is way different because if you say I'm using all these words, bookshelf, whatever, I think you don't have that many interpretations of bookshelf.
Yeah,
it's
that's
a
true.
Bookshelf,
yeah.
Or you have it fell on you when you were a kid or something, and you have an association. But it's not like the sound. That sound doesn't mean anything per se.
Yeah,
Even
it's
if
non-representational.
It's not. Yeah, it's got some representation, like the national anthem. You hear it, it means that. And that's why I think a lot of music fans, sort of people who are not practitioners or are not learning further about sound, that's the level it's working on. Oh, I love that song. That's the upbeat one, or that's the happy one, or that's the one where, whatever, there's these new stars, these people do.
People.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
There's a whole version of music that's just a semiotic practice. Oh, I like, that person's personality, and therefore I like the sound of that song.
Yeah, and I suppose so. You're arguing that because sound is so non-representational, it's not like I'm drawing like a picture, and you can see it as a bookshelf or as a cat or something. I'm basically making a sound. Then the meaning is going to be entirely, or at least largely constructed by the social environment you're in and the cultural environment that you're in.
Yeah, like when you played that, I've been studying the blues as well, so I know what you're doing. That's coming from a particular version of the electric blues or the whatever, so some version of country, like country blues. But we also are doing that too for musicians, for other people who are literate in the thing, like the jazz performances. You're quoting rhythms, you're quoting songs, you're quoting types of arpeggios. There's a language that you're also trading in.
Yeah, that's right.
Which just means itself, or it also means like where you're coming from, where you're learning is at. So there's different stylistic things. You can play more 30s, more 50s.
Mm-hmm.
You can extend the chords relative to different people who have done it. Just like you can say, well, I don't know how what the analogy is here, but if it's an analogy to thinkers, to intellectual thinkers, I'm not sure. It's quite possible.
Well, I'll play something else here. I guess I'll improvise a little bit of blues, just since we're talking about it. And then maybe we can just play for a minute or so, and then we'll talk about it afterwards. So here I'll try to, like you were just saying, there are traditions that we're aware of. And then it is interesting, like, because maybe you and I have studied blues music, but then somebody else, I take one of my brothers, let's say, who hasn't studied any music in particular. How is he hearing it differently than how I'm hearing it? Because my perception of the music is so saturated with all these cultural facts and all this history. Is he getting like a more pure emotional experience, and I've got all this head stuff going on? You know what I mean? Like, oh, that sounds like exactly like what T-Bone Walker would do in 1952 or something. Whereas he can just hear it without all of the kind of factual layers. So I'll just play a little something and we'll... So this is what I was thinking of earlier. Like, you could play a boogie, but then what you do is you also throw little riffs, like phrases, into that larger sort of paragraph, like little sentences or whatever. But anyway.
Yeah. Just reflecting on listening to it, and I guess it depends on what you're listening to, but I also felt like I was with you, like trying to, like when you were trying to hit something.
Yeah, and not getting it.
Or getting it or not getting it, but that process where when you're listening and you know what the mechanics are, you're also with the person in their struggle in a way to get there. And when you get there, it's even more exciting because you're expecting, you know where it could fall and where it could land,
I think that's right. When you're listening to music, well, you and I have the same thing that, like, say a basketball player has when he watches somebody free throw. There's this sense like your body has been trained to do that too. So you have a kind of immersion, a simulation of what you're seeing that's pretty deep compared to like a non-basketball player. So you've got all that going when you're watching. But also I think it's fun for everybody to watch musicians like reaching for something that's a little bit out of their reach. Like you ever see these guys who are so technically amazing that they're never going to make a mistake. They're never going to screw anything up. Everything's going to be executed perfectly. There's something dull. There's something boring, I think, about that. Whereas if you see somebody reaching that just out of their grasp, there's something exciting about that.
I wonder how much we could turn to aesthetics, because definitely that's my aesthetic too. Is I like the reaching, but that's also the kind of players we are. We're not. Yeah. We're not technical monsters.
That's true. Yeah.
And some of these technical monsters love that. Others love that stuff too. And I wonder how much is aesthetics and how much is just we've gone cozy with our
with our own style. That's true. So, I've glorified my own mistakes, turned them into virtues. Well, why don't you play something else too? Like What else would you want to convey in terms of either emotion or the form, or even technical skill, like something you could sort of demonstrate a little bit?
Let me think about it here. I mean, I was getting into this concept of aesthetics, and I
Yeah.
wonder if that's something we can go with. I wonder which way to convey that or have some sort of
Well,
to talk about.
one way to get it going is to think about traditionally aesthetics, at least in philosophy, was really considered to be a kind of examination of what was objectively beautiful. This is how the Greeks thought. And then we don't really think this way, but Plato thought there was a kind of form, and that beautiful things just sort of participate in that form of beauty. And when you hear beautiful music, you're getting a little glimpse into the form of the beautiful. And then Kant thought, well, Plato was not right about an objective beauty out there, but there are these objective categories of the mind. And so beauty is when the categories of the mind are sort of being activated in a harmonic way, whereas the sublime is when the categories are being sort of, disharmonic and in conflict with each other. And now we have a kind of, what I would call a sort of relativism of aesthetics, which is, we were talking about, it's really just culturally constructed. So,
Well, that's one way to say it, but the relativism of these things. So I would also talk about, or want to talk about, how modernism takes those notions of the sublime, the beautiful, and complicates them. I mean, I could try to do some of this on the instrument. I'll try to play something beautiful,
yeah,
to the best of my ability. Then I'll try to play something sublime, which is like the category mixing. I'll try to mix. I'll put some blues.
Add some pain.
I'll add some pain and some blues, and then I'll do something like you're saying, the modernity thing, which is beauty and ugliness.
Oh.
I think that's a big important part of beauty and ugliness. How can you do things that Plato would never consider beautiful?
Right.
Pythagoras.
Yeah.
But we consider beautiful. I'll try. Maybe it's all going to be ugly.
That's a tall order. No pressure.
So let's try it. So.
Yeah, that was a nice. Like it started out really sweet and a really like beautiful little melody, and then there was this blues section, and then you just went all sort of late 20th century or sort of
Yeah,
Stravinsky like,
that
you
was what I
know.
was thinking about. Yeah, and dissonance and in between notes, and some stuff was out of tune. Like that's ugly.
Yeah. But now, what do you think about the fact that like a lot of people don't want too much dissonance in their music? Is it a sign that they're looking for some kind of emotional therapy from music, which is really more like harmonies and things that are pleasant to listen to? Is it that that's a kind of bourgeois relationship with music versus this kind of more bohemian thing, which is I want a lot of dissonance in my music?
I mean, from my experience with the more experimental scenes, communities, I feel like this noise and this heavy metal is therapeutic for some
Mm,
troubled people too. And it's not pretty, but it's the onslaught is part of the catharsis.
hmm.
I mean, there's the beauty of listening to a nice, little Mozart symphony, and it's beauty. There's tons of stuff going on,
Right.
but it's all there's all this consonance and there's this perfect like Bach. Bach is a great
Yeah.
example. So you're listening to the perfection of a bunch of things like counterpoint, melody. You know, it's the apex of this tempered music kind of thing. Um, uh, so you're getting something. You're getting this like the resolutions are always where they're supposed to be. There might be
That's
some
right.
playing, they'll do double cadence or whatever. But when you get into these things that don't have anything expected, or they don't have expected cadences. Let's say that the beautiful, the perfect cadence, the perfect um, within modal system. Then it's something else you're going for. It's something else you're getting out of it.
Yeah.
I
When
mean,
I was before I became a professor, I was a professional musician, and I noticed that when I would go and play, I had the good fortune of being able to play like a lot of really great blues clubs in Chicago, and what I noticed was if I if I played at a blues club, and then if I played at a jazz club, what the audience was getting out of it was very different. Like at least when I was coming up, blues was really a kind of very working class. People were there to get drunk on hard liquor and get there were like fights at the end of the night. It was a rough scene. Blues,
mhm.
the blues scene has always been like that. Whereas some of the jazz clubs and obviously classical music, it's very refined. Emotionally, people are going for something else. They're having a different kind of social relationship. The music seems to be doing something else. So I don't know what that is, except we like what we like. I think there's some emotional therapy in it, but I don't know what. Because I noticed, one of the things that David Hume argues in the Standards of Taste, speaking of aesthetics, is he's like, well, all this changes with age. Like when you're really young, there's certain kinds of sounds or literature that appeal to you, and when you get a lot older, it's a different kind of music or literature altogether. And I think what you're saying is it's not so easy as Hume thought. You're just getting better. You're getting more taste.
If only.
Yeah, and you're just saying, well, no, it's really just different. Depending on your needs.
I mean, the thing that you just described about the concert hall, the jazz, and that has to do with class. I mean,
Yeah,
I know it's America. We're not supposed to talk about class, but that's part of it. Right? It costs more to go to a club
yeah.
than to a classical. Classical costs more. Opera costs
But I
more.
don't even think.
There's
But they don't even. Blues fans don't want to go to. Don't want to go to a jazz club. It's not like they want to get into a jazz club and they can't afford it. This is really what they want to hear.
Yeah, I mean, who doesn't want to hear it? It's good stuff. But
But class has defined that all along, you're saying. Yeah.
I just think that that's pertinent to the conversation. I don't think it's purely we're all sort of. I mean, if you're talking about cultures, we talked earlier about cultures and semiotics and these kinds of things, then you have to think about stuff like that. Like there's that famous book, Pierre Bourdieu, the book on habitus and taste, and he has this very funny table, which is just here are the pleasures of the different classes. Mm. And he says, this is, this class goes to this class goes to that. And that's what good taste means relative to the vernacular they've learned. Their aesthetics is a type of vernacular.
Yeah. I remember Frank Zappa made this argument too.
Really?
Yeah. Sure. Like near the end of his life, he did some interesting work on censorship. And part of his argument was this kind of argument, like, let's not think in terms of high and low, but sort of the postmodern view that certain classes have certain kinds of activities. That there is no hierarchy. Let me ask you about this though. What on earth is perfect pitch? Because relative pitch is the kind of thing that's more common, and that seems to me can be trained up. But do you have perfect pitch? Do you know anybody who has perfect pitch?
I know some people that have it, yeah.
And so is there any evidence that this is some kind of innate ability, or is it just very early on the child has sort of memorized frequencies?
It's basically innate.
Okay. And I guess would you hazard a speculation on what the hell that would be? Like, why would you have any kind of innate recognition of a scale that...
Not scale. You just hear what every note is. When you hear an A, it's just you can tell exactly when a note is, and when it's out of tune, it bothers you. It's been sort of detrimental to a lot of people because most people are out of tune.
So somebody can hear if it's like 440 hertz or whatever, and they can hear if it's like 445 or something.
They can just hear that it's not 440.
Oh God, yeah. So that could be a kind of torture.
Yeah, I've heard that it's torture for certain people. Yeah.
So the reason why I was asking is just because it does seem interesting to me, like in this constant conversation we're having about what emotions or cognitive abilities are native and which ones are learned, the same sort of conversation could be had with regard to music. And obviously it's going to be mostly learned. I think you're right that the analogy of a language is perfect. But then again, there's a deep grammar. If Chomsky's right, there might be some kind of deep grammar that allows for, natural languages to grab onto. And I'm just wondering, do you think there's any correlate to the deep grammar of language that's in music? Mm. And then the different musical systems sort of orient on it.
Oh, I do know that there's a tonotopic map in the temporal lobe.
Oh, tell me about that.
Oh, well, it's just organized according to frequency, to hertz. So you have this, and it's also in the inner ear. You have this in the cochlea. You have based upon frequency, on hertz. So high to low, like up to 20,000. Someone can correct me, but it's something like that. But you have that in the cochlea, then you have it in the temporal lobe. So you actually have a map of just possible sounds. But of course, most sounds are complex. Mm-hmm. So like in the cochlea, it's a complex wave. So you have a differential activation of the cilia of the hair cells underneath that wave in the cochlea. And you probably have a complex signal in the temporal lobe. So we all hear, not all of us, some people are amusical. There is a small percentage of people can't hear anything, can't hear distinctions. But I think we're all basically innately can hear the whole range of frequencies of.
And then music would be basically the kind of exaptation of this adaptive system of how to read your environment, basically through auditory perception. I guess my question for you would be like, there's kind of this debate. I think it was Steven Pinker who said he thought music was not an adaptation, but I think he called it cheesecake or something, right? It's just a kind of a nice thing that we can do with an operating system that evolved for other stuff. And I guess I'm wondering, what do you think about? Do you think music is an adaptation, or not?
I think it's one of our social, emotional, cognitive abilities. I think that it's part of social bonding. I think it's part of emotional. It's a type of emotional expression, like language, like yelling, like dancing, like moving your body, like eye contact. I think, to me, it's as basic as that. So I don't think at all it's cheesecake. I don't like cheesecake.
That's good point.
I don't like cheesecake.
I don't like cheesecake. Okay, good. Because I was just thinking, this is an interesting issue. What in music is biological? What is cultural? I mean, I'm of the tendency to think in terms of gene culture coevolution, and I can imagine where musical interbreeding populations with music may have certain advantages over interbreeding populations without music. So I can imagine where music could be very important as a kind of social glue, as a kind of emotional management system, as a way of communication, all these things. So
rituals, social rituals need sound.
Yeah.
Including the social rituals even we have nowadays, like cinema and all these kinds of things. But I mean, I can't imagine, how would you have a celebration without music?
Mm-hmm.
How would you create the mood of some sort of initiation rite, or rite of passage, without sound? How do you scare people, like the war,
right.
War sounds, like sound? It's just such a rich, it's kind of like, I feel like it's been colonized by language. We think about sound and language so much. We're wont to ignore all these non linguistic sounds. Also, the way people's voices sound. There's all this poetry to the sound of the voice, to the way you say something, which we read as the intention, the Gricean intention of tone and stuff like that. But there's other things going on too, I think, in terms of how do you say something? Like with sound, how do you tone? How do you make something sound a certain way? And it's a whole art. It's a whole art that is part of the musical automobile. I don't know, musical vehicle.
Yeah. Well, we're probably almost out of time, but I thought maybe we could just say a couple words about imagery, because we've been talking about music and aesthetics, and I had one kind of interesting insight which I thought I'd run by you to see, because it seems to square a little bit with what we've been talking about, and that is I was originally a painting major in college, and then for all kinds of reasons stopped painting and stopped making art for like 20 years. And then recently got back into it, and I have noticed something interesting, which is that I can see better now. It's not like I can read stuff I couldn't read before, but I definitely can see, like if you're just going down the street, I can see shadows and colors and relationships in space. And I think this view has been corroborated by many people who draw or paint, and I'm sure many of the people here who listen to this will know what I'm talking about. It's one of the things about poetry, like it helps you sort of see the world anew. And I think drawing trains your eyes to be very perceptually sophisticated or nuanced. But what I noticed is that my linguistic mind is always coming in and sort of canceling out my perceptual abilities, like with some narrative or some story or some theory or something. Like it's almost like the aesthetic cognition, whether it's music or images, can be very rich and subtle, but then the linguistic propositional mind just comes and pushes it down again, and dominates. It just dominates everything. And so anyway, I just wanted to share that with you and just see if you had any feedback or any similar kinds of experiences in music, anything like this.
Yeah, I think so. I think so too. And it's kind of linguistic, but also there's this. Sometimes I'm hearing something, but my theory mind says no, that can't be right. It must be this. That's the next logical chord. And inevitably I'm wrong. Inevitably my ear is right or my hand is right. And my
Your theory
mind
is wrong.
Yeah. Well, my theory doesn't apply in that situation. So it sounds like what you're saying. You're seeing shadow, but your mind is saying, oh, there's no, or you're seeing a color. Your mind's like, that's red.
Right.
But your mind is seeing not red. Now I've tried to do this too, like with looking at like what does this really look like? If I wanted to paint this color, what does that color really look like? And it doesn't look like what you think. You see something that's like black. Well, it's not really black. When you look at it relative to other colors, but there is this because oh yeah, we'll paint it black. Don't even look at it.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying, right?
Exactly. Like if you look at a painting by Cezanne, okay, there's an orange. It's just orange. And then you look at it more carefully and you're like, oh God, like there's blue and there's pink and white here. And then if you look at a real orange or a cup, it's the same thing. There's all these reflected light, patterns in the thing. And you're right. The cognitive brain just says, it's red. Just get the red paint out, slap it on there. We're done.
Slather it on.
So I guess this is this might be part of this overall kind of not dual aspect, but sort of dual processor view of the mind too. I don't know exactly, but my suspicion is that we have these affective and perceptual abilities that we inherit from our mammal ancestors. They're very subtle and sophisticated. But then these sort of neocortical powers come on top, and they, in our species, they tend to dominate. And it just seems like there's this kind of tug of war between, perception and I would think even in playing music, like here you were just playing the oud, but in a way there was this time when you didn't know what you were doing and you had to use all those kind of cognitive powers to figure out, like, okay, where's the scale? What's the melody? What can I do to get this in tune or whatever? And then there's this process of letting go of that kind of processing. And I think in music it's really this constant back and forth between these formal, rules or grammars or the linguistic, what's appropriate linguistically, and then what you're actually doing in real time, which is going to be using those tools.
Yeah, it strikes me that when you are playing music, something that we're not doing right now is listening.
Yeah.
Because we're playing solo. But if we're playing together or playing in a band, the sound that we're making is only relevant or makes sense in its context. So the whole time we would be listening, that would be not our theory, but that would be that's what we're relating to.
Yeah.
And that process also I would not consider very much cognitive, because it has cognitive elements, whatever cognition is such a broad thing, but you're relating to others, but you're kind of going like it's pushing you. It's also
intuitive, more intuitive.
It's intuitive, and it's sort of affordances going on too. Like you hear someone doing something, you hear the rhythm pick up, you hear it slow down, you hear it's going to end. We've got an ending kind of thing happening right now.
Yeah,
and then you're pushed into that. So you don't think ending. You think,
right.
Oh,
You just feel like, okay, here we go.
Yeah, and the audience feels that. Everyone feels like a good ending is agreed upon.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and this is our good ending. I think.
Okay.
Let's agree to leave it here, and then we'll come up with a new topic for next time. But it's been a pleasure as usual, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.